I have constantly been at war with my depression from the time I was a child. I was doing really well. I was making a ton of money. The focus was too much and too heavy on those things. 3.5, 4 years later, my father died of cancer, and the depression just came right back full force, and it had never left, right? The fix didn't necessarily come from me, ultimately. What I did is I got rid of my safety nets. I got rid of the things that I thought were so important to me, but that were just material things. Recognizing that those things can be used as a crutch just as much. And so seeking my faith, man, at the end of the day, I'll go back to that as the number one thing by not making it about me.
Today we've got friend and CEO of the Sales Rebellion, Dale Dupree. He's going to be talking about some of his motivators, his cosmic bridge, how his wife has been an incredible cosmic bridge for him, how she helped lift him out of depression, and also talking a lot about his faith and his motivators and his why and his higher purpose. I feel like Dale is someone that really embodies the spirit of this podcast. What's the cosmic bridge for Dale Dupree?
I love the question. I think it's probably one of the most unique ones I've ever been asked, especially using that specific word cosmic and how you tie it into bridge. I think it's very eloquent, beautiful. I look at it as a very romantic question. I think about ultimately what I do at the Sales Rebellion goes far beyond teaching people sales. We teach people to be better. And the thought behind that is, are you a mom? Are you a son? Are you a father? Like what is your thing that you identify as? Who are you as a person more than anything else? The funny part about that, right, is that salespeople love to put labels on themselves, right? They'll say things like, "I'm a really good seller because I'm extroverted." Right? Like we already do it in our business world to an extent, right? We try to create these labels for ourselves to like justify why we do things. But it's funny how we run from the things that we naturally are so much. I mean, me, I'm a follower of Christ. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'm a friend. First and foremost to anybody and everybody that I meet. So whether you're on the side of the road and you're broken down, or you're trying to pick a fight with me at a soccer game, like I'm your friend. Like at the end of the day, it's cool. I'm here to help. I'm here to be somebody that serves, first before asks for anything, or at all ever. In that case, from the perspective again of who I am, like what really makes me excited and wakes me up in the morning is the identity of being able to live life alongside other people and enjoy life and find happiness and find fulfillment alongside other people. So your question to me is, it's very romantic and it's extremely deep, but hopefully that scratches some of the surface for the rest of the conversation for us.
Well, let's get into that because I thought the word you mentioned there is interesting, romantics. What do you mean by romantic? Why do you think it's a romantic question?
Yeah, I think we, as a society, we look at words like that with a false narrative. Or we say things like, as a man, that can't be a driving motivator for me, right? What has to be a motivator is that I'm an alpha male and I need to conquer things and use other words, right, to describe that language. But what kind of language is it ultimately, right? It's a love language, right? And romance is really just the feeling of excitement, right? And it's also tapping into what the mystery of love truly and fully is in the first place. That's what romance actually is. It's almost like something we chase, right? But that we can epically feel, right, when we can put ourselves in a position to embrace it and receive it. So when I think of the word romance, I don't think of what 99% are thinking right now. I think of the feeling of fulfillment and happiness. I think of the feeling of ultimately seeing beyond like the flesh and being able to look at somebody for who they actually and really are and see past the influences and see past the preferences and be able to just recognize as a living entity, as a human being, as somebody that I'm walking this earth with, and I have the opportunity to learn from and to love and to be a part of my romance, right? My novel, the story that I'm telling. That's what the word means to me.
Amazing. So, all right. So, romance is something that I see a lot with you as well, and your content and the things you talk about. So, what's interesting with your content is you talk a lot about your wife and your relationship with her and the impact it's had on you and the love you have for her. So this may be a long answer, this one, but we've got some time here. So, but I wonder if you could tell us about your story with your wife and how that's impacted you and how she has been a cosmic bridge for you in some sense.
I'd love to talk about that. She's in the other room, so this is brownie points for me at the end of the day. So, but I'm not ashamed of what we share and the things that she's done for me. Ultimately, I owe her my life when all is said and done because she saved me. And then that goes back to being 17 years old, uh, kind of going through the motions of being a teenager and the pressures of things like having a girlfriend and the status of those types of things and the way that I was raised a little bit different. My dad was a very romantic person himself. He romanced all of the relationships that he had, right? He made you feel very special, very heard, very seen, very wanted, but ultimately he also set a precedence around my mother. And like if you mess with mom, dad was going to come home and have a chat with you. That was kind of the ultimate perspective of the love that my dad had for my mom, right? We knew that he was very present in her life and that we all were to respect her with the same type of love as well too, that it wasn't just exclusive to my father, that we could all love her like that. But ultimately it helped us to see that we need that pillar in our life as people. Me and my siblings, we're all married, by the way, in first marriages. Knocking on wood real quick for some of my siblings. I'm just kidding, guys, if you're listening. But I kid. Romance is funny sometimes too, guys. Okay, so the thought going back to being 17 for me was that I was seeking something a little bit more than what the world told me or what people were pressuring me into. I wanted a wife. I wanted to fall in love, and so I had falsely done that with a few women who had just tormented me and had their own narration to the story that was being told, and they cheated on me. It was pretty intense, and it scarred me. It traumatized me to an extent as well too, in regards to like how I've evolved and who I've become and the things I fear and my own actions even. So when I look back at how I met my wife, it came at kind of the perfect time where I was falling back into the trap of just like being with a girl. And it was somebody that ultimately was very toxic for me and just wanted one thing, and I wanted her to call me, her husband and no one else. That right where she was a little bit like, yeah, let's date and then let's take a break and then let's date again and then because maybe I'll find somebody else, right? So for me, like you can use that kind of concept to that's a metaphor for life. What I just said in most cases, in the way that we commit to things as people, and in regards to our likes, our dislikes, in regards to our passions, in regards to our dreams. Right, so here I am like going through these very heavy moments and being able to really learn a lot about life, and I was open minded to that. So when I got on stage, and my girlfriend calls and says, "Hey, I'm not going to make it to your show," and it wasn't like a super important one. Well, we were about to head out on our first tour that we were planning and narrating together as a band. We were wanting to get signed to a major record label. It was one of those times where it was like, yeah, it'd be nice if the girl I call my girlfriend showed up to this for sure. But she says, "Hey, I'm not coming." I look out, and the rest is history, bro. There's this girl with this little black dress on, totally trying to show me the goods, all the goods, right? And I realized very shortly after I like was visually seeing this woman and thinking like, wow, she's really pretty, right? That also she came to see me. She actually came out to the show to see me, and as she told me the story of how she first heard about my band and that she'd actually seen me play before, and a jealous guy told her I wasn't from here and not to talk to me, and that she came back for round two kind of thing. I recognized this was like fate or destiny or something pretty big ultimately than just I met this girl, right? So I took it pretty seriously. We started dating within a couple days. I remember like 4 or 5 days after this moment, we were in a mall, walking, holding hands, and my best friend saw me, and she had, I think we stopped and like said hi, and she like went into one of the stores. I was like, I'll be right there, kind of thing, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, man, I'm in love. Like I love this girl. I'm gonna marry this girl. And he's like the last ones, like even people that knew me, right, knew the track record, and didn't believe that it could be happening. And and those were moments for me that were very they clarified things for me. They gave me a better vision around what was happening and ultimately how to find it. Right. So if you think about that for a second, like I had to go and fail in a couple of relationships. One that drove me almost into madness, like literal madness from a mental health state, where I wanted to hurt people and ultimately end my life in the process. To finding this woman that changed the way that I feel about everything. I mean, so much so that like I was doing things that no 17-year-old should be doing from the perspective of the legalities of them, and also just the quality of life, right? Most people see a white guy living in a nice neighborhood and think, ah, nothing can happen, right? But I was mixed into a lot of bad stuff, and almost immediately those things just started going away, right? As soon as I had this purpose, right, for living, and that was 19 years ago, literally 19 years this last August. So we've been together ever since, and we've been married for 15, going on 16 years, and she to me, like, she is ultimately the thing that motivates and drives me beyond anything else that this earth can offer, and that's powerful because of it, I have a better understanding of what the word love means. Because of it, I have a better understanding of how important it is for people to feel the meaning of the word love as well too in their lives. And really what the story that we're telling, the narrative that people are taking, how different it could potentially be with the right kind of influence in their life.
Well, I've got goosebumps here. So in a way, she is a big she is your cosmic bridge, right? And to some extent, because you mentioned there some people, when I talk about connecting the spiritual and material, spiritual is a word that can freak people out. But what I say, what's the higher purpose here, right? And you're saying your wife is a big higher purpose for you, and she gives you that reason and your why in life.
To go back to what we were, the word romance, right? The romance really describes the mystery of love ultimately and how we seek to understand it. uh, like I look at my relationship with my wife as very romantic, but ultimately that she solved that mystery for me in the process. And although I do continue to seek the adrenaline rush of not knowing what tomorrow will hold, I there's no question in my mind as to where we're ultimately going, which is someplace very happy with one another. And that's a really cool thought.
That's awesome. So I wanted to clarify as well because you were talking about music there. So before Dale started his business and sales consulting and even worked in sales, Dale was in a band, right? So he was a bit of a rock star. So I wanted to go back to those days, and I think one of the things you often think with musicians is because you've got this attention, right, and you're on stage and you've got all these people like worshiping you. Sometimes you can get a like bigger ego, and that can affect you. And I know you said also you were with some of these women before your wife, and that was not having the best impact on you. So how were you in that era? Like, what was Dale Dupree like in his rock star musician era?
I was an interesting person because I always have been this Dale. At the end of the day, I've always been the Dale that seeks to create a difference in other people's lives and wants to make impact, wants to have fun. But that Dale was still ultimately very selfish and struggling deeply with his identity, with depression, and I was still very young, so it was a very fresh understanding of those things as well for me too. I don't have the kind of tenure that I do now. I didn't have, I should say, at that time. So even though I was the guy that would come up and be like, "Hey, I'm Dale. Nice to meet you," I also was the guy that the one of my friends would come to and go, "Hey, we have to go beat this guy up." And I was a big dude. I was a very outgoing person, and I was technically a protector or a defender. So people would look at me as somebody that would go and get into the fight because some guy hit his girlfriend, and that was wrong. And Dale would step up to the plate in those moments and call on violence in the name of good, which I learned very quickly in my life. There's no good to violence, period. Like, no matter how you spin that. And I had to learn the hard way ultimately because I drove a ton of people away from me and I created a reputation that I didn't recognize personally. I was audacious, but I was like out of control, right? From that perspective. However, I was very passionate about music, and at the time, I still had a passion at that point in my seasons. I still had a passion for my faith as well too, and so I wanted to be on tour in a band on the road, talking to people about their lives and how my faith had impacted mine and how I could help them. And so I was still a helper right at that point in my life, but it was riddled with kind of that the dark side of things where you didn't have to hide ultimately the things that tempted you. It wasn't a secret with that group of people. It was you were accepted, right, for wanting to try drugs or wanting to drink alcohol every single night until 2 a.m. Like it was cool, it was acceptable, it was a fun thing, it was part of life. Wanted to be promiscuous and have a group of people that would keep it secret for you, right? Like that, all those things were a reality and were there, but I did not like those things. And ultimately, because I did not like those things, I became hated by those same groups. And like Dale's a dick, right? It's like literally like the words that would come out of people's mouths because I was looking at those things as wrong, and I didn't really know how to love people through their problems. I only knew how to fight back, and at that stage in my life, that was what was very prevalent. Music changed me. It changed me every day. It changed me. It molded me into something different. I love to entertain. I love to have fun. I love to see people just like let loose and enjoy 30 minutes, not connected to any of their problems or having to worry about the world. And I like to be in that outlet. And I did it myself. I was also disconnecting in those moments and having a lot of fun and entertaining. And it was my purpose. And ultimately, I think I'll always be a musician, right? I'll always be somebody that seeks out the perfect rhythm and alignment of notes to be for someone to hear and listen to be able to cause change and impact in that person's life. And so I just use different mediums in regards to how I enable the musician in me. I don't play an instrument or sing in a microphone anymore, but I do it in other ways. So music ultimately is always going to be a part of who I am.
As you mentioned, you were quite young during this period, and if you look at it on the surface, you kind of had a lot of things people would dream about, right? You're touring, you're in a band, you're getting lots of adulation, even if it's from women that don't have your best interest at heart. But you mentioned, it was a time actually you were quite depressed, and you see this with a lot of other people who are actually, people look up to, but inside they're depressed. So why was that? Why do you think in that period of your life that was happening internally?
Yeah, the struggle with depression starts when I was a child. Uh, at a young age, even though I was like the happiest, most go lucky person that you probably ever were around as an adult, right? Like Dale's such a happy kid, right? There was something that was slowly kind of just eating away at me, and a lot of the depression and general argument, I think people have wrong. And ultimately, I look at my lineage and I look at my grandfather as an example, and his father, and the stories, and I look at other people in my literal DNA and genetics, line of genetics, and how they struggle with depression. And I think to myself, well, this is a little bit bigger than what we actually are measuring. Ultimately, we're just saying, oh, something happened and you're sad. Like it gets a little deeper than that for sure. And for me, the discovery of my sadness was even a journey because at first I wasn't really sure if that's what it was or if it was fear or it was very confused for a long time, but it culminated into just constantly at some point feeling sorry for myself, right? Like why don't I have these things, and why don't why don't people like hanging out with me, and those were from my own perspective, right? Those were also just the demons of depression coming and finding other ways to get under my skin and to attack me ultimately. And so by the time I got into music, I mean, if anybody has ever gone out and first I should say heard me talk about my depression, then gone out and bought one of my CDs, especially the CD that's entitled "This Grave Is My Poem," and and read my lyrics, yeah, they would see that I was probably one of the saddest people in the world, and that. But again, most people just didn't know because I also thought that because I'm a man, I'm not allowed to cry, I'm not allowed to be sad. Depression isn't a thing, It like I was being told by the world and circles of people, and definitely not my father or anybody that was you know in the direct family or even my wife at the time, like uh line of communication. It was really just like the outside world more than anything. But I had a song even on that album called "In Ashes I Leave," uh and the lyrics were, uh hold this rope tighter, I hang here covered in shame, and in ashes I leave to find my peace. Those are the lyrics, some of the lyrics. And so people probably heard that stuff, and we were in a metal band and thought like, "Yo, that's so sick, dude. That's so metal." But like ultimately, I was pulling that from a place of deep darkness and sadness, and it is a reflection when I go back and I look at like just the way we named songs or the lyrics to them, and how I kind of slipped all my problems into this album. And sure, there was motivators of like trying to heal, right, or like get it off my chest or whatever else. But it had been a long journey up until that point. As a matter of fact, I'd already tried to commit suicide at that point in my life. I had slit my wrist at 15 years old. So, and I wasn't, for people that are listening, I wasn't influenced by any type of culture at that point in my life. That the what stems from that attempted suicide, or the evidence of what led up to it, you could probably say is better, was a lot of different traumas, a lot of different interactions with people, a lot of things that a kid shouldn't have to go through ultimately, and a lot of it influenced by other kids, right? Like, which was kind of the part that really boggled my mind the most. That though to me, I had thought that my friends were the people that I could go and tell this stuff to, but ultimately they were my greatest enemy at those points in my life, and that's very confusing, especially for a kid. At 37, I can look back on it and be like, nobody really knew what they were doing, right? And that the adults, the parents that were in charge, didn't know what they were doing either, and were influencing incorrectly and creating, what happened, right? Most of those kids are in jail or dead, right, at this stage in our lives, right? Or I haven't heard from them, at all. So that's kind of it. Wasn't necessarily that I was just depressed at 17. It was something that I'd been struggling with for quite some time, part of my journey.
It's deeper. So, your route to where you are today, as you said, you're 37 now. So, you mentioned your wife was one of the people that kind of helped you during that period and see light in the darkness, I guess. But I imagine there's some other people, especially in the world we're living in at the moment, who may be going through a similar thing. How did you get yourself out of that? What advice would you give to people who are in that situation?
There's two things that I did ultimately, and here's where I'm gonna just go ahead and kind of like narrate the rest of my life up until now too. Is that I struggled with those things in numerous stages of my life, to include when I was about 26, 27, in that range. Sometimes it's hard for me to do the math when I'm talking about all these other stages, right? But it was around the 2012, 2013 timeframe. And actually it was 2013, I shouldn't say around, that I had tried to commit suicide. And as an adult, and in a very dark place where I was also very successful. I was the number one sales rep at my father's company, who had just sold a year and a half earlier. I was the number one sales rep at the new company that was much larger than us and had more people, 20 reps, right? So I didn't have to beat a couple people. I was beating, a city block is how I saw it, right? And things were good. I was doing really well. I was making a ton of money. I had gone from, maybe the most I ever made was 50 or 60,000, to literally a buck 80 overnight, and then topping the 250 mark and just climbing, right? The rest of my career, just it's always been up from that perspective. Things that people think that success is really defined by, right? And people like to hear this part of the journey, right, from the perspective of that they can go, oh, cool, I could probably make that kind of money too, but they don't hear the underlying issues, that the focus was too much and too heavy on those things, and it turned me against myself at the end of the day. And that struggle didn't just stop at that stage, right? Like I was able to come out, and there were things that were happening behind the scenes, even with activities that I was involved in, people that I was involved in, lying to my wife, hiding stuff, because I just was like not who Dale in those stages, and I was not happy, and I was back to that stage of being 15 again, and just saying, well, there's a simple way out of this. And 3 years later, 4 years, yeah, 3.5, 4 years later, my father died of cancer, and that rocked my world. And the depression just came right back full force, and it had never left, right? But it just showed right back up again, and this time I was gonna beat it, right? And literally up until December 15th of last year, right, I have constantly been at war with my depression from the time I was a child. And the things that I recognize, I look back on, people say things like, "What would you do different?" Nothing, nothing. I wouldn't be the Dale that I am today sitting in front of you if I did things different. I'm happy with who I am. I love Dale. At the end of the day, even his imperfections and the things that I can't stand about him, I love them right at the end of the day. So I look back and I think I wouldn't change anything. I would just be more open minded to recognizing that the fix didn't necessarily come from me ultimately, because if we leave it up to us, we typically choose the safe routes. We say things like, "Oh, this is a tough decision," but is it? Do we have accountability to that tough decision? And so I leaned into my faith heavily over the course of the last year, and just started to seek a deeper relationship with my faith, which really has helped me throughout the years, no matter what, but has really taken me to the next level over the course of this last year. But what I did, bro, is that I said goodbye to everything I knew. That's how I have beaten at this stage my depression, which I don't believe is like fully gone from me by any means. I just believe that I completely rewired my brain. What I did is I got rid of my safety nets. I got rid of the things that I thought were so important to me, but that were just material things, like my home, that was my childhood home that my father owned. And when he passed away, I thought, I'm going to keep dad in the family by owning this house, right? And I'm going to keep him alive by owning this house. Things that ultimately were lies, and they were toxic things to me. Right, that same house, bro. I told you I'd slit my wrist when I was 15. Did it in that house, right? So here I am living in that house now as an adult, struggling with depression, right? So just things where you typically look at your life and you go, "Oh, if I go to therapy and I do this and I do that and I do that and I run this playbook, I'll be better." But ultimately, those are all masks at the end of the day. And therapy is great. Talking to other people is great. Absolutely, have helped me significantly. But ultimately, it was recognizing that those things can be used as a crutch just as much. And it's selling all of our stuff. Literally, we sold all of our stuff, bro. We sold 90% of what we owned. And most of it we donated. Some of it we sold, kind of thing. And got rid of everything, bro. We got rid of everything, and live just day to day at this stage, which allows us to be more present with ourselves, more present with each other, more present with the people we serve, more present with our community. We can feel the room better. We can understand what's going on differently. And when you start to feel that sadness well up, it's easier to talk about, because you're not in this state where you're like doing all the stuff that's supposed to make you better. And so you're not saying to yourself, "Why do you feel this way, bro? You're taking these pills, you're talking to this person, you shouldn't be feeling like this." But instead, we're constantly in a state of awareness that it doesn't end that easily at this stage of my life. And because of that, it's every morning, it's all right, are we going to have a good day or a bad day? And if it's going to be a bad day, I'm not going to just sit back and do what I normally do. I'm going to be more vocal about it. I'm going to be more transparent about what's happening. I'm going to try new things. I'm going to, even if it's just writing it in a text message, I'm going to say stuff to my wife that's uncomfortable and like hurts to sometimes. But it's at the end of the day, it's all out of love, and it's all out of in the name of how do we get better. So that would be my advice for people, but it's the worst advice in the world, because ultimately the person that helps you get out of your issue is you. And you can't just look at yourself and that sadness and go, "Oh, I could do this." It's not easy. And so seeking my faith, man, at the end of the day, I'll go back to that as the number one thing, by not making it about me,
The higher purpose. So I wanted to ask a question related to that. And so something you mentioned earlier, when we were talking about depression, you were talking about like genetics and you have history of depression in your family. And then you're also saying you're a man of faith, right? And I'm a man of faith as well. And a question I'm always toying with, a bit of a philosophical question, is how much of our life is predetermined by some kind of, higher power, and how much of it can we control ourselves, and what's the balance between that? So how do you see that question?
Yeah, in most religions, because I've studied world religion, I'm not just like, yeah, I've been a Christian all my life and stayed that way. Like I was the guy that was out trying to prove myself wrong at one point, like, why do you believe what you believe, man? Is it even real? And ultimately, I think that that's what we all seek, right? It's why this question comes up in a lot of people's minds is because we want to make things more real. And it's hard to say that for some people that an entity, a god, let's just call it, controls our lives because of the things that go wrong. Like, wait a second. So, is the God that controls my life love, or does he freaking hate me? Or is it just like that he's like on his period and he's not in a good mood? Like, what is happening right now? So it's hard for people to wrap their head around that. Me personally, I see in all world religions I've seen that it's very interesting that when you read texts about the way that the relationship between a god and man works, no matter what god it is, right? And that is that there are all these rules and things that are preferences in most cases that people latch to, right? It's like, okay, if I do these things, I'll have a great life, right? But ultimately, the people that do those things are the people with the darkest secrets, the biggest demons, the most problems, right? At the end of the day, because they're using those types of tools that are given to us through faith to hide behind for the most part, right? And I'm not calling anybody out here. I'm just speaking the truth, my own truth ultimately, right? But hopefully it's a good perspective. And so, what I've always loved about faith and religion in general is the concept of what free will is. And in most religions as well too, there's kind of a good side and a bad side, right? However you want to look at it, whether it's Buddha or Shiva or whether it's uh, Muhammad or Jesus, there's always like a good person fighting against bad stuff, right? Whether it's really dark and demonic at that or just fleshly, right? In the way that it's taught. No matter what, religion tells us that there is free will and that ultimately that this earth is like a stop, right? And you know what's crazy to me is how we kind of belittle that to an extent, right? We say things like we go, well, look at how big the galaxy is. There's 23 billion suns, I think, something like that. Like the number is insane, right? So there's 23 billion different suns out there that could essentially power an Earth-like planet somewhere, right? Yet, we're the only one. And what's interesting about that thought to me, again, is this whole idea of like, does God control us or do we control ourselves? Is that here we have this infinite galaxy that we have like proven, right? It's fact, like man can see it, right? Unless NASA's lying to us and Elon Musk is, a puppet, right? Whatever the three-headed dragon is, right? But with that said, though, we look at things like the galaxy and everything else, and we go, man, we're so small and tiny and meaningless and worthless, and right, and like that's why everything sucks in the first place. Instead, we have to look at something like that and be like, there's 23 billion suns. And as of right now, we are the only life that we know exists. Now, I 100% just want to put this out there, believe there's other life. I just want to say that I get this feeling there is, right? But think of the magnitude of that, right? We have been created. This earth is a thing. It has a history. It has context. It has events. It has tons of different elements to it as well too, right? And here we are sitting arguing about whether or not God is real and that he controls our life, right? And I know we're not doing that, but that's what most people do, right? As opposed to saying, wow, it's probably the only question ever that goes through someone's mind that doesn't have an answer because it goes so beyond our simple comprehension and understanding that how could we figure that out. So for me, it's not even about the argument of like, does God give us choice or does he control or what is that? It's about this idea that we try so hard to make everything normal. We make our sex addiction normal. We make our drug addiction normal. We make our fallacies normal. Like we try so hard to just make everything so normal, right? Because we can't explain it. right? And we're afraid of that. I embrace that. And I say to myself, man, whatever the plan is, it's a weird one for sure. Like the fact that I'm sitting in a thing called a kitchen where you stored utensils to do things like cook a meal on an oven and stove is a crazy thought to me in the first place. But I break it down to the simplest form. And by doing so, I don't question the things that feel out of reach because I look at everything in a state of awe and wonder. And I would encourage people living their life to do the same thing, and that you'll discover a lot about yourself in the process.
100%. And I like what you said around, looking at the galaxy and how small we are in comparison to it, and the universe is actually a good thing. And my dad gave me that advice when I was younger. He's like, if you're ever feeling down or anything, like look at the sky, and it's just taking yourself out of yourself and thinking around, what else is out there as well. Last question I wanted to ask you. So as you mentioned, you've had this incredible journey, but there's been some dark moments. You had your depression, you had the passing away of your father. Talking about faith, like how has faith helped you in those moments? Because a lot of people say that it's often in the darkest moments where you see that light. So what's been your experience with that?
It's heavy. Like to answer that question, it's a heavy answer, and it's a hard answer because ultimately it is through the identity of understanding that it's not all about me, and that sure these things are happening to me individually, and they're terrible things, but I'm being equipped more than I'm being punished at the end of the day. I'm being equipped to be able to be somebody that can help because this isn't something that just I struggle with. From any of the perspectives of the things that I've gone through in my life, even the stuff not mentioned on this podcast, it's not just me. There are hundreds of thousands of millions of other people that have walked the same path and that have had the same problems. And most of us don't know how to narrate the story, right? So we live in doubt. We live in confusion. We just walk away from things like God because we can't figure it out, right? And for me, I lean deeper into the mystery of these things that are happening, and which is that romance, right? And I lean deeper into, well, God, if it's gonna be me, then you better be doing great work, at this stage right here, and you better be giving me direction and guidance because I'm gonna lean into those things. I'm not gonna lean into woe is me and why is this happening. I'm gonna lean into how do I use this as a weapon in my own life, even how do I use this as something that motivates me. Like I want to be a healthier person and live past 60 so that I can see my son have kids because my dad didn't get to see me have children, right? And those are hard truths, but they're also specifically things that you can lean into to help you. And that is the design of faith, right? Because ultimately people would say like, well, why would you do that? Right? Like why wouldn't you just say everything sucks and become a terrible person and hate life, right? Well, that sounds miserable. And I get that people don't say it exactly like that, but that's what people say when they say things like, how can you believe in God? I literally hear it that way. I hear because I'm not a person that sits back and says everything sucks. That's not who I am. And ultimately, I've seen the good, I've seen the happiness, and the things that my father gave me, regardless of whether or not he could have given them to me for another 20 years. Everything he gave me leading up to the day that he left was more than enough. It was more than I deserved. And ultimately I look at it that way. I look at the blessings of my life, and instead of saying, well, this sucks, I say this is better than I deserve ultimately. And that it's crazy this didn't happen to me earlier because I'm a terrible person sometimes, right? Like I look at it from that perspective. Ultimately I'm humble in those moments, and I lean back into ultimately the foundation of what that faith looks like, which is that I am just a speck of dirt at the end of the day that is one of the most important specks of dirt that's ever come into existence. And the more I lean into that truth and the identity of who Dale Dupree is, the more the world changes. Because changing the world isn't about me going and becoming the president of the United States and making everything better. That's not a thing. Changing the world is about enabling other people to think differently with their life, their livelihood, and the things that they desire to accomplish to empower and enable generations and a movement of individuals that can see past, I don't like this and I have a preference against that, but instead to love. And ultimately, the only way to do that is to tap into things like your faith, because there is nothing in the world that loves you as much as God.
Love your gratitude, love your faith, Dale. Love just having you in my life, and yes, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Last thing, obviously, I recommend following Dale on LinkedIn. But anyone else who would like to get in contact with you, how can they contact you?
Best way to contact me is definitely LinkedIn, but you can also head to thesalesrebellion.com. And there's plenty of ways to get an email into my inbox over there just the same. Or find our Rebel Slack group on there. Come and DM me inside of there. Or just literally search my cell phone number, because I put it out so much that if you really want to get a hold of me, you need help, you have a question, you're lost, you're broken, you're weary, I'm willing to listen. So just find me. If you're hearing this and you need help, just find me. I bet you can.
Love it, Dale. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Cheers, bro.
Incredible episode today with Dale. Dale's always someone that inspires me, so I knew this was going to be a great one, and some great lessons learned in terms of how to have a better relationship with your partner, how to live with higher purpose, how to find your cosmic bridge and embody it on a daily basis. Don't forget to subscribe to us on all the podcast channels and YouTube. See you on the next episode of The Cosmic Bridge.